when you're in your prime, you never have it out of your hands for a moment. And it's something that belongs to you for all of the day. You never close the case.
Hi, I'm Sean Perrin, and you're listening to the Clarinet Podcast, the show for clarinetists looking for in-depth, career-accelerating conversations about all that's neat for clarinet. On today's show, the legendary Stanley Drucker returns for the third time. We discuss his move to California from New York, what some of his hobbies were during his busy career outside of music, and of course his latest CD release, the Heritage Collection Discs 8 and 9. As a Clarinet listener, you can get a signed copy of these discs at digitalforce.com by using code Clarinet89 with your purchase. That's Clarinet89, all one word, with your purchase at digitalforce.com. Before we get started today, I'd like to thank our season sponsors, Leger Reeds and Bakun Musical Services, for making today's show possible. Imagine a reed that lets you focus on your music, lasts for months instead of days, and even saves you money in the long run. It's all possible with Leger Reeds, the world's leading synthetic reed brand made right here in Canada. The European cut reed is preferred by Leger artists all over the world, including Eddie Daniels, David Schifrin, Corrado Giuffretti, and many others. It offers a warm, clean sound with a great ease of articulation and is now available for E-flat, B-flat, and the bass clarinet. Learn more at your local music store, or you can now save 10% on your Leger reeds with code Clarinet at checkout at leger.com. That's Legere.com. The new Bakun Q-Series clarinet features a completely redesigned bore inspired by the Bakun Custom Series clarinets. This means you can play and perform like the pros, but for less. Use code Clarinet at bakunmusical.com to save 10% on your entire purchase and try the Bakun Q-Series or Protégé clarinet risk-free for 30 days. Just pay the return shipping if you aren't fully satisfied. Shop now at bakunmusical.com and use code Clarinet at checkout. I'm here on the podcast today with the wonderful Stanley Drucker for the third time, but he's coming to us this time not from New York, but actually from California. So Stanley, welcome back to the podcast.
Well, thank you. Happy to be here.
You are known, of course, for living in New York and performing with the New York Philharmonic over the years, but you currently find yourself in California. And I think that an update is due just in general for kind of how you've been the last couple of years, especially since we last chatted, which amazingly was already 3 years ago.
Right. It's just a normal transition. We got an offer on our house, and we figured we'd be nearer our adult children who live in California, our son Lee and our daughter Roseanne. So it was just a normal kind of a transition.
Moving out there, you must be enjoying the weather a lot more, though.
Well, they do have change of seasons, but no snow.
It's funny because it's April 13th when we're recording this today, and I'm experiencing a blizzard outside. And I often say this here on the podcast, but I'm very jealous of our American guests sometimes and their wonderful locations. I sure would like to be in California right now. That's for sure. So, Stanley, I want to get started. I want to talk today about your Heritage Collection and a few other things. But first of all, how have you been the last 2 years as music has kind of been put on hold around the world, and now that it's sort of just coming back?
Yes, I feel sorry for my colleagues everywhere who have sort of been, on hold, where live performance seems to be, a major event if you can get it done, and it's very hard to perform, for a live audience where you have the energy, coming from that audience, where everything is spread out and the just not the full effect of a live performance.
I agree. I think there's so much that's lost when we take things away completely, of course, but also when they shift online. Did you yourself participate in very many kind of online musical endeavors?
I basically did what was coming along the pike. There were some, small ensemble things, and one of them we finished 2 rehearsals, and we're to have 2 more. And it got canceled because of COVID. It was in New York, and it was at the 92nd Street Y, which is a famous venue for chamber music.
Yes, and this was canceled. And actually, this delayed the release of this CD project as well. I heard Jerry Bunky was telling me about that.
Yeah, probably so. Yeah, I think what he's done is an incredible work. Putting such a varied collection together, and it combines recording with live and historic particular events, and he's just to be complimented for that. This Heritage collection is really a joy to me. I mean, if you think of the past and the players of the past, you might have heard them in one piece somewhere, and maybe you heard them orchestrally where they had their orchestral solos. But to get a collection like this, I think it's really it's a joy to me. It covers such a span of history.
Well, I've been thinking about this Heritage collection because I remember when the first, I believe it was 5 discs came out.
Right.
And then there was disc 6 and 7. And I was surprised to hear that disc 8 and 9 had also been released, because we're now approaching, over 10 hours of music that you've released just on this collection. And I thought about it, and I realized that you played over 10,000 concerts with the New York Phil.
That's what they say, and I never doubt what they said.
Well, if you start doing the math, though, I'm not sure if anyone's done the math here before, but, let's assume that an orchestra concert is, an hour and a half, 2 hours long, conservatively. If you do the math, that's over 20,000 hours of just New York Phil concerts, not taking into account any rehearsals, which is 850 days worth of music. So that's just the New York Phil. You've played an incredible amount of clarinet, probably more than maybe any other person.
Well, we were always current, and we had the various types of music that we could go to in performances. I think of so many over the years. Pretty full memory bank with this stuff, and there've been exciting moments, I would say that.
Absolutely. And so you talked a little bit with Ed Jaffe about how at the beginning of your career, so many of these pieces were all new to you, of course, as they are to any clarinetist. Every piece is new, right? I was wondering if we could reflect a little bit, though, on some of the pieces, like, for example, Debussy or Berg. These pieces, when you were younger, they literally were also new as well, but they've since kind of moved more into a genre which is viewed now as rather contemporary. But of course, there's new music of today, so these pieces have matured. So I was wondering if we could reflect on specifically some of the pieces on this disc set, the Brahms, the Berg, the Debussy, that have sort of grown up with you. Like they say, the history of the orchestra is in you, but also in a lot of these pieces for clarinet. So how have these pieces matured? And looking back, like, what is it like playing them today or reflecting on these performances versus when you were younger studying them as well?
The ideal is to rethink them and try to make them fresh. If you have changes to make them, because your outlook, your life experience has changed, increased. And you want to give a fresh feeling to these pieces, and for instance, Debussy on the set, they have one of the discs has it with piano, and another disc has it with the orchestra, with New York Philharmonic, and Leonard Bernstein conducting. So you get a different feeling, with the full palette of a whole orchestra as opposed to just the keyboard.
I'm curious, which version of those two pieces do you prefer to perform, or do you like, or they both kind of got their own flavor?
Oh, I think that we're so used to hearing it probably more with piano than with orchestra, but there's a difference, because the color with orchestra of the instruments adds something to the entire piece, where just with piano, it's certainly valid, and it was sanctioned, I guess, by the composer, but the orchestral version, I think, has a little more color, and the total effect is very different.
I have to agree with you. It's interesting though because Debussy wrote this piece first for piano for the competition. I think it was in 1910, and then the year later he realized it for orchestra. But strangely enough, it actually works in my mind better for orchestra. Kind of just the way like Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun works so well. Debussy's writing just suits orchestral playing so well.
Yeah, it's a full palette, I'll tell you.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, another one that was originally with orchestra was the slow movement of the Corigliano concerto, where of course everybody was heard the orchestral performance. I mean, I'm on two recordings for that, but the one he calls it soliloquy, a clarinet and string quartet, is one of the performances on volume 8 of 8 and 9, and it really brings back a very very intimate lovely homage to his father, to John's father.
Absolutely, yeah. And so some of these pieces you're saying have been sort of transformed over the years for different, almost different playing situations, right? To make them more, the ability to play them more.
Yes, that's true. Another interesting work on the set is the double clarinet concerto of Meyer Kupferman. That we performed that on Long Island for the premiere, and then we did it in Prague at the Dvorak Hall with the Czech National Orchestra. So it got to travel a little, and that was a fun thing. We all came. Meyer came to Prague, and there was an American conductor, Paul Freeman, who conducted it, and the whole is wonderful. It's right on the banks of the Moldau, or the Vltava, the river. It's a wonderful atmosphere.
So there's so many beautiful pieces on this set and throughout the other CDs of the set. But there's also so many pieces that clarinet players perform nowadays and have kind of gravitated towards, like the Debussy, Brahms, etc., that have become very common. But I couldn't help wondering that over your career, are there any pieces that you remember playing when you were younger that were quite popular that have since fallen out of favor that maybe we should rediscover?
Well, I think some of the early 20th century American composers, Mason, Daniel Gregory Mason, for one, Gordon Jacob. Then there's some international composers from other countries that are represented. Even a part of the domains, the clarinet solo by Pierre Boulez, and even a duet by Alfred Prince, which is a real doozy. I think it's for B flat and A clarinet.
You mentioned playing pieces and trying to keep them fresh, which is an incredible feat for having played over. I think you're entering your 8th decade of association with the New York Philharmonic. So keeping pieces fresh over that kind of career is incredible achievement for anybody. But how do you think that younger players should try to approach pieces in a fresh way in light of all the recordings and performances of these pieces that have existed over the last 80 years as well?
It's a labor of love. One tries to rethink a little bit some of these pieces and have different ideas about some of the phrasing perhaps, and the articulation, the dynamics. There are ways of reliving these works, but with a slight change here and there. Because you don't want it to just be one style or one tempo.
Yeah, I feel so many players try to recreate the recordings that they've listened to in this day and age.
Yeah, well, there were some over the years. There've been some, wonderful recordings. this clarinet repertoire that we all claim, and certain things get passed by, where they rarely hear anymore. Even generally in music, how many piano recitals that you don't hear anymore. Look at all the wonderful works for string quartets that you don't hear anymore very often. So there is a transition, and now I think the public is more used to hearing a bit of a piece and not the whole piece, the way things are today. I think the sitting down and listening to an entire Mahler symphony, it doesn't happen that often in recorded music.
It's so interesting you say that, because people do tend to pick and choose what they listen to on their phone or their computer or whatever.
They listen to a minute or two of something, and you really don't get the entire experience.
Yeah, or the focused kind of listening that used to happen. I mean, people will sit and play on their phones or cook dinner or do everything else while they listen. But in the past, it was very much like, you had to sit in the concert hall and focus and listen to the music only. There was nothing else to do.
The problem has been that most of the concert halls were shuttered in this pandemic. So I feel sorry for young colleagues who are starting out and not bringing their art to a general public. It's been tough, the arts have certainly suffered, no question about it.
Absolutely. And it's sad too how I think this was really 2 years without live music. I mean, so many people missed out on really discovering.
Oh, definitely.
So I want to ask, and this is not directly related to the clarinet, but I was thinking, because we talked on one of the last episodes about how you spent a lot of time traveling to and from rehearsals, and we talk about how many concerts you played over the years. That's also a lot of kind of travel time and downtime, and of course you had to sleep and have weekends and normal activities. You had children as well. What other kind of hobbies throughout your life have you been interested in and taken?
One thing, we used to do some long distance pleasure boating.
Okay.
We had a small power boat that was 30 foot, with cabin and fly bridge, and in the free time, in the free weeks that we had, mostly in the summer, either early or late summer, we'd go to many different distant places, like from where we were living on the south shore of Long Island. We'd go from Sag Harbor in Montauk to Block Island, to Martha's Vineyard, to Nantucket, to Cape Cod, and surrounding waters also. Always, bays and coves and towns, and up the Connecticut River, and up the Hudson to various places. In fact, one trip we went through a bit of the Barge Canal, the Hudson River into the Barge Canal, and went all the way to Ithaca.
Wow.
You need weeks to make those trips, because when you're traveling at 10 miles an hour, it takes you a while to get there, and then you got to contend with fog or wind or various weather conditions, sea conditions. Everybody's a novice in that, and I certainly was a novice throughout those years, but I guess I was determined to do some of that, and that's basically what our summers were. In fact, I even played some concerts along the way. I was on a series twice in Martha's Vineyard and one in Nantucket. So I did get to actually play a little bit.
Amongst your amazing career, and taking these summers to travel and raising 2 children and all these activities. I mean, the average person, I mean, we discuss on this podcast a lot about like successful clarinet players and building a career and becoming successful for oneself. But successful people seem to have the ability to switch their mind kind of from one thing to the next. Like if I had, even one concert coming up, I think I'd have trouble, relaxing to take a vacation, for example. But you talk about switching between these kind of things with such ease. Do you think you have a special ability to focus and then distance yourself from that focus when needed?
When you're in your prime, you never have it out of your hands for a moment, and it's something that belongs to you, for all of the days. You really never close the case.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. So I think that's a real testament to those listening. I mean, I was at a school the other day, coaching some kids, young kids, and their teacher had asked them to fill out a practice sheet for an hour a week. I think is what he was asking. And I mean, you're when you're doing what you're doing and with the passion and level of interest that you're doing it, I mean, you've got a point there.
You've got a repertoire that some of which comes along of very difficult works, and you have to really know what's going on in those pieces. So it takes extra work. I mean, everything isn't a Mozart symphony or a Haydn work. Some of these new pieces or newer pieces were very tough and required actual practice.
Absolutely. And you mentioned in another interview in the past as well about how you would practice and get better kind of based on the needs of the day. Like because of all the music that you were playing, I mean, your practice would consist of getting better on those pieces.
I always felt that one should practice what they have to play. There's limited time, especially if one has a full-time playing job, plus commuting, which takes a lot of hours, and touring, which we did constantly, and recordings were going on also all the time over those years. It was, I remember, a 7 or an 8 week span without a day off, and everything was being recorded, at that time, and there were several venues where recordings were done, maybe 3 or 4 venues, and so each one was a little different in acclamation. So you had to really sort of be in that groove.
Did you have a special way of having a piece that you were practicing because you're playing it, of sort of getting around difficult passages? Or, I mean, some people will change the rhythm or make little etudes out of sections. I mean, what would a practice session look like?
Well, you have to know what is going on while you're playing. The music before you come in and after you play your last note in a passage, you have to know what's going on in it. During, very important, and you certainly would have to have an idea of the overall piece, and not just the 4-bar exit.
So, are you describing a fair bit of score study then?
Well, there has to be. You have to know what's going on with your little solo or big solo, as it may be.
I guess what I'm thinking, though, is this is so easy for people today because we can just throw on recordings like yours. But what was it like, some of these pieces for the first time, even playing them and not having that technology?
Yeah, there was no reference. One had to guess at certain things, and when you're young enough, nothing will faze you. You'll try it, many ways. But these pieces are some of the popular ones, the ones that get played all the time. One has a good reference. There must be, a lot of performances of that. The recordings, of course, were a big part of it. Not in my early years. There were very few recordings of clarinet works, and there were a couple of definitive recordings of orchestral pieces with players of the past who you sort of try to do what they did, and some of them were good examples, I thought.
Well, I think that's such an interesting insight, is that you're focused on how you fit into the greater whole, even if it's a chamber piece with, piano or clarinet. You're focused on that. And I wonder if that's a real key to any, even a younger student, like maybe not to stay so focused on just what they're playing.
You have to fit in the whole palette, that whatever you're working with, you try to enhance others, and hopefully others will try to enhance you.
Absolutely. So you mentioned on a past episode of the podcast here as well, and it's something I thought about in the last couple of years a fair bit, because I have recently had to start saying no to things because I've got 2 children now and I'm just very busy with a lot of stuff, and no has become one of my favorite words because it gives me the control over my time. But I remember you saying in a past episode that one of the ways you found success in clarinet was to make sure you said yes to everything. So I felt a bit of a conflict about...
Right, never say no.
So we're kind of at odds. So where was the point in your life where if it came up, where you had to start saying no because there was just so much on your plate already? And how do you decide what to say yes to?
Well, I tried never to say no to any project, and sort of had a routine where you it was always in your hands. You never closed the case, that kind of thing. And a young person has an advantage because they don't suffer as much as an older player, perhaps. It becomes more difficult to stay focused where you don't have the joy of a younger player discovering new things, and if there's an error, it's not life and death.
Yes, yeah. But let's say you had 2 opportunities that came up at one time. Like, do you have a system or a method of deciding which one you would like to take, or?
Well, that happened, at times. But you try to do everything if you could. I would say it depends on what it is, what hall. If it's an orchestral thing, who's the conductor? What's the venue? Does it get reviewed? Do people hear it? I mean, it's not because one has to play for an audience, and you can't just sit in isolation and expect something to communicate.
That's what's been hard about these modern times with the whole pandemic, is everyone's kind of just at home trying to make themselves online.
It's a worldwide problem still, but I think it's getting a little better. It's getting a little bit better now.
So have you come out of this with some new performances and things that you're doing? I mean, you're still playing, which is incredible. I mean, they say you retired from the Philharmonic in 2009, but that word is definitely not.
If you can play, you play, and that's the way I look at it. And try to learn some of the new stuff, and to keep the old stuff fresh as you can, and of course, not everything is going to be in a great hall or famous music site, but it's still worth it. It's still worth it, and that's the whole point. And of course, maybe you don't open as many reed boxes at this point, which is definite. And in the old days, the reeds were never ending. Try to have a good read for your run of concerts and rehearsals, and then hopefully have the next read ready for the same thing. It was always part of the routine. It was never ending. Luckily, we had companies like Van Doren, Buffet, that were always on top of, at the cutting edge of everything, and it was a wonderful partnership to have with these folks.
over this time coming forward out of this situation, do you have any advice for, players as they continue after this, pandemic that we find ourselves in as they move forward?
You try to enjoy what you can do, and and try pieces, slightly different. That everything isn't in cast iron. You can try a piece a little slower or a little faster. Try a different dynamic in a certain phrase or solo. Try just experiment a little bit, and if you're lucky, you can play in groups with good colleagues, of course, you can play quintets or trios or whatever, and it's an ongoing situation, where one is trying to make a statement, and if you're lucky, you get to play a lot of those.
Yeah, there's musical opportunity. You have to kind of make it yourself as we come out of this, and I think we can all bond together again as musicians by kind of stepping up and trying our best to bring it back. We forget that as players we haven't been in the concert halls, but many listeners and audience members haven't either. So we all have to kind of try to get back together, and even as listeners, go to your friends' shows if you can. Lead in that way, I wanted to ask as well, so we have a question from a listener here who is asking what your warm-up routine has been like over the years, and has it changed, and what kind of things would you play on stage before the concerts?
Well, you the first thing you have to know is if you start a note, it's going to start, and that's all involved with the read, of course, and your personal relaxation, or whatever you want to call it, calmness, and knowing what is going to come out when you put the mouthpiece in your mouth, and you're ready for the first entrance. It shouldn't be. You don't want to get a surprise. Most surprises aren't great.
Yeah. So predictability is what you're going for.
Well, you want to know what it feels like, because every read is a little different. But sometimes the repertoire, requires certain things. Maybe with certain pieces, you need a lighter read, and others you can, do with a stronger read. But the thing is, don't be opinionated to the point of not trying things. You have to try things.
Well, some people have such a regimen,
Yeah, and I said it before, as far as the practice goes. Practice what you're going to be playing, because you can all the close and Kretsch and Jean, and it's all well and good. It helps. It tells the fingers where to go. But if you're going to play a concert or a recital or chamber music, you know those pieces. Practice those pieces.
So it sounds like your warm-ups. You said it yourself. The clarinet basically stayed out of the case and was always in your mouth. So I suppose a warm-up is a bit of a, when you're playing that much, the idea of a warm-up is not quite.
Well, you do have to reeds do change, and some people play sometimes in a high altitude or a very dry atmosphere. You have more of a struggle in a way.
Yeah, but I guess what's to warm up when the clarinet never gets cold?
True. That's true. Well, if you know that, you can perhaps accommodate it, and I'd say that it's a learning. It's a learning thing. You have to know what you're trying to achieve, what the written page is telling you, and to be ready for anything, because if you're playing in a band or orchestra, you have to more or less go with whatever the conductor it requires, and that one conductor wants this very soft, another one wants it very short or very loud. It's flexibility is a big part of it. Solo playing is, of course, you have more responsibility, where you're playing a piece specifically for your instrument, and there's a little more leeway. You don't have to follow a conductor's beat, but the certainly one is flexible. Being flexible has to be part of it, and I think once you get the hang of that, and don't agonize over every note. It's not. It's the recording may never change, but playing live is changing all the time.
Yeah, I think if there's any sort of thread between, we've now had 3 conversations, and even some of the other interviews I've seen online, I think you're so focused on making sure the music is fresh, but also being a flexible player who interacts kind of well with others, because music is a social activity,
Yes, it helps. Yeah, and you get in an orchestra, you get to know your colleagues, and they know you, and what has to come to the fore and what has to be in the background.
Absolutely. So before we wrap up here, because I want to respect your time, but I wanted to ask you, because I don't think I asked this on any of the other 2 times that we've chatted, but is there anything that you sort of wish someone had asked you or would ask you on an interview like this that you've never been asked to talk about?
Well, I think you covered the salient points, involving preparation and reads and so forth. I think flexibility is it's an easy word to use, but you have to have your own voice and your own concept. And as you know, with clarinet, like many instruments, there's different styles or everything like that. Even in string instruments, some play with a fast vibrato, some play with less, some play with long bow, others do a lot of short phrases. It's with clarinet, it's the same thing. If one can have a concept of what you think is valid, and stick to it when the chips are down, I think that helps. I think we covered just about anything. I think the repertoire is a big thing. I think people should play the new pieces, and some of them are not new pieces, but they don't get played. So I think to expand your repertoire and to try to get into the time period of it, and what you think the composer meant in a particular style or phrase, would be very valuable.
I think that's a good point, to continue to explore new pieces of today and really to push forward the clarinet into the future is a great piece of advice.
Absolutely. Because everybody plays the usual 4 pieces, and you want to widen that a little bit.
Well, thank you, Stanley, for coming on again today. If you're listening to the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, it will end here. But for those who are supporting the podcast behind the scenes at clarinet.com/join, I've got a couple extra little questions for you, and I'm going to be talking to Stanley about some of the lightning round questions, which you've probably heard before talked about on this podcast. So we're going to focus on some sort of extra special little bits at the end. So thank you so much, Stanley, for coming on the show today.
Okay.
Imagine a reed that lets you focus on your music, lasts for months instead of days, and even saves you money in the long run. It's all possible with Leger Reeds, the world's leading synthetic reed brand made right here in Canada. The European cut reed is preferred by Leger artists all over the world, including Eddie Daniels, David Schifrin, Corrado Giuffretti, and many others. It offers a warm, clean sound with a great ease of articulation and is now available for E-flat, B-flat, and the bass clarinet. Learn more at your local music store, or you can now save 10% on your Leger reeds with code CLARINET at checkout at leger.com. That's LEGERE.com. The new Bakun Q-Series clarinet features a completely redesigned bore inspired by the Bakun Custom Series clarinets. This means you can play and perform like the pros, but for less. Use code CLARINET at bakunmusical.com to save 10% on your entire purchase and try the Bakun Q-Series or Protege clarinet risk-free for 30 days. Just pay the return shipping if you aren't fully satisfied. Shop now at bakunmusical.com and use code CLARINET at checkout.